Harold Thompson sat in his cluttered study, a sanctuary of memories and accomplishments. At 75, he was a man who had navigated the turbulent waters of life, building a fortune that many envied. The walls around him were lined with books, trophies, and framed photographs, a testament to a life well lived. Yet as he gazed out of the window at the sprawling garden that once brought him joy, a heavy weight settled in his chest. The garden, once vibrant with laughter and family gatherings, now felt desolate, echoing the rift that had grown between him and his children, Mark and Emily. Harold's fingers traced the spines of the books before him, but his mind was elsewhere. He recalled the day his children confronted him, their voices sharp with urgency and desperation. "Dad, you need to realize that you won't be around forever. We deserve a share of what you've built," Mark had said, his tone both assertive and pleading. Emily, with her eyes glistening, added, "We're not asking for much. Just a little help while you're still here." The confrontation had left Harold reeling, their demands cutting deeper than any business deal he had ever negotiated. It was a moment that shattered the illusion of familial harmony he had clung to for so long. "Do they really think I'm that frail?" he muttered to himself, anger and disappointment simmering beneath the surface. The betrayal stung, and the thought of his children plotting against him was unbearable. Harold had sacrificed so much to provide for them, pouring his heart and soul into his work, only to find themselves entangled in greed. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as memories flooded his mind, images of childhood laughter and summer vacations. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, Mark and Emily sat in a dimly lit diner, a greasy spoon that had seen better days. The booth was sticky, and the flickering neon sign outside cast an eerie glow on their faces. Mark leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Look, we can't let him just sit on all that money. He's not going to change his will unless we make him see how serious we are." Emily nodded, biting her lip. "I hate this, Mark. I really do. But what choice do we have? He's always been so strict, so unforgiving. We need to show him we're not just his children. We're adults who deserve respect and a fair share." Mark leaned back, a hint of frustration in his eyes. "Respect? You think he'll suddenly see us as equals? He's stuck in his ways, Em. We need to manipulate him, make him think it's his idea to help us. He's old and stubborn, and he won't even notice what we're doing if we play it right." Emily sighed, her brow furrowed with concern. "But what if he finds out? I don't want to ruin our relationship with him. He's still our father, no matter what." "Look, I get it," Mark said, raising his voice slightly, drawing the attention of a nearby table. "But think about it. He's had it good for too long. It's our turn to get something out of this. We can't just sit back and wait for him to die. He might leave everything to some charity or something." Emily's heart raced at the thought. "You're right. I just wish it didn't have to come to this. I feel like we're betraying him." "That's the cost of doing business, sis. We need to think of ourselves for once," Mark replied, his tone hardened with determination. "Let's set up a meeting with him. We'll frame it as a family discussion about the future. He'll never suspect a thing." "Okay," Emily said reluctantly, her mind swirling with doubt. "But we need to be careful. We can't let our emotions get in the way." As the siblings plotted their next move, Harold remained oblivious to their scheming. He paced the room, the shadows of doubt creeping in. What had he done wrong? He had always worked tirelessly to provide for his family, to instill lessons of hard work and integrity. Yet here were his children, driven by entitlement and greed. The thought twisted his stomach. Suddenly, he heard a noise outside his study. Voices, hushed but urgent. He approached the door, straining to catch the words. Mark's voice carried clearly through the crack. "We can't let him keep everything to himself. We need to act fast before he gets any ideas." Harold's heart raced. They were plotting against him. He leaned against the doorframe, struggling to process the betrayal. How could they, after everything? The realization stung like 1,000 needles, igniting a fire of anger deep within him. They were his flesh and blood, yet they had chosen to conspire instead of confiding. As he retreated into the shadows of his study, Harold felt a mix of sorrow and rage. He recalled the countless sacrifices he had made, the late nights spent working while they slept, the dreams he had for their futures. Now he felt like a fool, a pawn in their game of greed. In an attempt to calm his racing thoughts, Harold's gaze landed on an old family photo album resting on a nearby shelf. He picked it up, brushing the dust off the cover. With delicate reverence, he opened it, the scent of old paper wafting into the air. Each page turned revealed a story, a memory that had once brought him joy. Birthday parties, graduations, family vacations. A wave of nostalgia washed over him, mingling with the bitterness of betrayal. He turned to a picture of a younger Mark and Emily, their faces lit up with joy as they held their first trophies. "What happened to you two?" he whispered, his heart aching for the bond they once shared. The laughter and innocence of their childhood felt like a lifetime ago, overshadowed by the greed that had taken root in their hearts. Harold slammed the album shut, a newfound resolve igniting within him. He could not let them take what he had built without a fight. He would protect his legacy, not just for himself, but for the values he had worked so hard to instill in them. They would learn that wealth came with responsibility, and they would not inherit his fortune without understanding its true value. As he sat back in his chair, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him, he knew he had to prepare. He would not be a victim in this scenario. Instead, he would confront the betrayal head-on, reclaiming control over his life and legacy. But first, he needed to gather his thoughts and devise a plan that would not only protect his wealth, but also hopefully restore the relationship he had with his children. In that moment, Harold Thompson, the once broken man, felt a flicker of hope ignite in his chest. He would show Mark and Emily that family meant more than just money. It was about trust, respect, and love. And perhaps in the process, he could teach them the most important lesson of all, that true wealth was measured not in dollars, but in the bonds that held them together, even in the face of betrayal. Harold Thompson sat at his cluttered desk, the soft light of the lamp casting a warm glow on the yellowed pages before him. The old typewriter clacked rhythmically as he poured his thoughts onto paper, his heart heavy with the weight of memories. With each keystroke, he felt the pang of nostalgia mixed with regret. He had spent a lifetime building a fortune, but now it seemed like a fragile construct, threatened by the very people he had raised. As he wrote about his childhood, Harold could vividly recall the hard work and determination that had shaped him. "Life doesn't give you anything for free," he typed, reflecting on his father's words. He remembered the long hours spent in the fields, the sweat rolling down his back as he toiled under the sun. Those days had forged his character, instilling in him a strong work ethic that propelled him to success. Yet, that same determination had created a chasm between him and his children, Mark and Emily. He paused, fingers hovering over the keys, and thought of his son. Mark had always been the rebellious one, the dreamer who sought shortcuts rather than the long, winding road Harold had taken. The memory of their last confrontation echoed in his mind, the way Mark had stormed into the study, demanding a share of the wealth he believed was owed to him, as if inheritance were an entitlement rather than a reward for hard work. Harold felt a mixture of anger and sorrow. He had spent years trying to impart wisdom, yet all Mark saw was a dollar sign. Turning his attention to Emily, he mused about her struggles as a single mother. He had always admired her tenacity, but it had been clouded by choices that led her to resent him. "You never understood," she had said, tears glistening in her eyes. "You were so focused on your business that you forgot about us." Harold's heart ached at the thought. He had sacrificed so much for their futures, yet they seemed to view him as nothing more than a bank. With a sigh, he continued to write, documenting the failures that had shaped his life. "Failure is not the end," he typed, reflecting on a business venture that had gone awry in his younger days. He remembered the sleepless nights and the fear of losing everything. But those failures had taught him resilience. They had shown him the importance of standing back up, dusting oneself off, and trying again. Perhaps, he thought, if he could share these lessons with Mark and Emily, they might understand the true value of hard work and integrity. Meanwhile, across town, Mark and Emily sat in a dimly lit diner, the air thick with tension. They huddled over a table, whispering fervently as they plotted their next move. Mark leaned in closer, his brow furrowed. "We have to act fast, Em. If we wait too long, he might change his mind again. He's getting older, and he won't be able to fight us off forever. Emily nodded, her fingers nervously tapping on the Formica surface. But what if he finds out? What if he decides to cut us off completely? Her voice trembled slightly, a mix of fear and determination. She had always felt overshadowed by Harold's success, and the idea of losing her father's wealth was terrifying. He won't find out, Mark insisted, his confidence unwavering. We'll get a lawyer to help us. We can make him look unfit, like he's losing his marbles. He's too proud to admit he needs help, and we can use that against him. Do you really think that will work? I mean, he's still sharp. He might see right through us, Emily replied, her concern evident. I know my dad, Mark said, leaning back with a smirk. He's always underestimated me. If we play this right, we can turn this into our advantage. We deserve this, Em. He's had his shot. Now it's our turn. As they spoke, a plan began to take shape, filled with the echo of betrayal. They were two children seeking to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs, blinded by resentment and entitlement. Back at home, Harold continued to write, feeling a mix of hope and despair. The act of documenting his life was cathartic, but he couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. His heart raced as he recalled the hushed whispers he had overheard outside his study. Something was brewing, and he needed to uncover the truth. Days passed, and Harold's resolve strengthened. He decided to confront his children, but not before gathering his thoughts. He wanted to ensure they understood the lessons buried within his life story. The more he wrote, the clearer it became that he needed to share not only his successes, but also his vulnerabilities. In doing so, perhaps he could bridge the gap that had grown so wide between them. On a particularly quiet evening, Harold received an anonymous tip about a meeting Mark and Emily had arranged with a lawyer. His heart sank as he read the message, each word like a dagger piercing his chest. Betrayal coursed through his veins, but rather than feeling defeated, he felt a surge of determination. They had underestimated him, and he would not allow their greed to dictate the terms of his legacy. I can't let them do this, he murmured to himself, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. He took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs with renewed purpose. I will confront them, but on my terms. As he sat in the quiet of his study, he resolved to bide his time, plotting a strategy that would turn their schemes against them. He knew he needed to gather evidence, to understand the full extent of their plans before striking back. Harold's mind raced with possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of control returning to his life. Meanwhile, Mark and Emily met with their lawyer in a sleek office downtown. The man was well-dressed, with an air of confidence that put them at ease. So, you want to contest your father's will? He asked, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled. Yes, Mark replied, a fire igniting in his voice. He's been unfair to us our entire lives. It's time we stood up for ourselves. The lawyer nodded, intrigued by their grievances. Tell me more about your relationship with him. What exactly do you believe warrants a contesting of the will? Emily glanced at Mark, her voice steadying. He was never there for us. It was all business, business, business. We were just an afterthought. Now, he's hoarding all this wealth while we struggle. The lawyer listened intently, taking notes. I see. And you feel that this has affected your father's mental state? That he may not be fit to make sound decisions regarding his estate? Yes, exactly, Mark interjected, his enthusiasm bubbling over. He's old and stubborn. He needs help and he won't admit it. We can prove that he's not in the right frame of mind to handle his affairs. As they continued to discuss their plans, Harold sat alone, grappling with the betrayal he felt from the two people he had loved most. The thought of confronting them filled him with dread, but it was a necessary step. He needed them to understand that their actions had consequences. Family is supposed to be everything, he whispered to the empty room, his heart heavy with sorrow. But now it feels like I'm fighting a war against my own blood. Determined to press on, he returned to his writing, crafting a narrative that would expose the truth. He would not allow Mark and Emily to rewrite his legacy or manipulate his story. Instead, he would stand firm, ready to show them the value of integrity and hard work. As the days turned into weeks, Harold felt the tension mount, but he remained resolute in his purpose. He would gather his strength, prepare his heart, and when the time was right, He would confront his children, not with anger, but with the wisdom of a man who had lived through the trials of life. The battle lines had been drawn, and Harold Thompson was ready to fight for his legacy. Harold Thompson sat at the head of the long, polished dining table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him as he awaited the arrival of his children. The dining room, filled with the soft glow of candlelight, was adorned with family photographs that lined the walls, each capturing a moment of happiness long past. It was a setting that should have felt warm and inviting. But for Harold, it was a reminder of the estranged relationships that had developed over the years. He glanced at the clock on the wall. The minute hand ticked slowly, each second stretching into a reminder of the last confrontation he had with Mark and Emily. They had come to him, demanding their share of his wealth as if it were their birthright, and he had felt the sting of betrayal in their words. Now, as he prepared to host a family dinner, he hoped that this gathering would help mend the fractures that had formed between them. The door creaked open and Mark stepped in, his demeanor tense. He was dressed sharply, in a blazer that seemed to cling to him as if it were a protective shield. "Dad," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks for inviting us over." "Of course, Mark. It's been too long since we've all sat down together," Harold replied, his voice steady. He tried to read his son's expression, but found only a mask of indifference that made his heart ache. Emily followed closely behind, her entrance lighter, but her eyes darting nervously. "Hi, Dad. Smells amazing in here," she said, attempting to inject some cheer into the atmosphere. Yet her voice had an edge of desperation, and Harold could sense the underlying tension. "Thank you, Emily. I made your favorite, roast chicken," he said, gesturing for them to take their seats. As they sat down, Harold felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him, recalling the countless family dinners they had shared in happier times. As the meal commenced, the conversation flowed in fits and starts. Mark picked at his food, his mind elsewhere, while Emily tried to engage in small talk. "So have you thought about that trip to the lake this summer?" she asked, her tone hopeful. "It would be great to spend some time together as a family." Harold chuckled softly, trying to mask the tension in the air. "That sounds wonderful, but I think we have more pressing matters to discuss," he said, carefully observing their reactions. He sensed the unspoken words hanging between them, the weight of their hidden agendas pressing down on the dinner table. "Pressing matters," Mark repeated, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you know," Harold replied, choosing his words carefully. "Life, family, the future. It's important to keep those discussions open." He looked directly at Mark, whose eyes narrowed slightly, as if gauging Harold's sincerity. Emily sensed the rising tension and quickly interjected, "Dad, we want to be involved in your plans. We care about you and want to make sure everything is okay." Her voice was earnest, yet Harold could hear the underlying urgency, the plea for reassurance that he was still in control of his life and his fortune. "Everything is fine, Emily. I appreciate your concern," he said, his gaze shifting between them. "But I am getting older, and I want to ensure that my affairs are in order." Mark leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively. "It's never too early to talk about the will, right? I mean, we both know what happens next." He looked pointedly at Harold, his voice laced with accusation. "You're not planning to just leave everything to some charity, are you?" Harold felt his heart race at Mark's words. The betrayal he sensed in his children's schemes was now boiling to the surface, and he needed to tread carefully. "My will is my own business, Mark. What matters is how we support each other as a family," he replied, his voice firm. Emily's expression shifted from concern to determination. "Dad, we just want to make sure we're taken care of. You've worked hard for everything. We just want a fair share." Her words hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications. "Fair share?" Harold echoed, feeling a surge of anger at the entitlement in her tone. "Have you both considered what that really means? You think I owe you something just because you're my children?" Mark's jaw tightened, and he shot back. "It's not like that. You've always been so tight-fisted. You never helped us when we needed it." "Helped you?" Harold interrupted, his voice rising. "I've given you the tools to succeed. You both have had every opportunity I never had. I built this life from nothing." Silence fell over the table, broken only by the clinking of cutlery against plates. Harold felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the realization settling in that this dinner was not the reconciliation he had hoped for. Instead, it had become a battlefield, where old grievances were unearthed and wounds reopened. Emily, her voice trembling, said, "We're just trying to understand, Dad. You've built this empire, and we want to be a part of it." She looked down, her vulnerability laid bare. "Part of it?" Harold repeated, incredulous. "You want to take what I've built without lifting a finger to earn it?" He felt a wave of disappointment wash over him. "You need to learn that loyalty and respect come before inheritance." The tension in the room was palpable, and Harold could see the frustration boiling beneath the surface in both of his children. He felt his resolve hardening as he considered the alternative, a future in which they would simply wait for him to pass, expecting to reap the rewards of his lifetime of hard work without truly valuing it. As dinner wound down, Harold excused himself to the study, feeling the weight of their words pressing down on him. He needed to gather his thoughts to draft a new will that would reflect his true feelings about respect, loyalty, and the necessity of earning one's place. In the solitude of his study, he gathered the legal documents, his heart racing with determination. He would craft a will that emphasized the importance of hard work, one that would challenge Mark and Emily to confront their own shortcomings. They would learn the value of his legacy, not just the monetary aspect, but the principles he had lived by. He envisioned a future where they would have to earn their inheritance, proving themselves worthy of the life he had created. It was a harsh lesson, but perhaps the only one that would resonate with them. And as Harold penned his thoughts, he envisioned what he would say to Frank, his old friend and attorney. He needed to discuss the plan, to ensure he was making the right decisions. Frank had always been a voice of reason, and he would need that now more than ever. "Dad?" Emily's voice broke through his concentration, pulling him back to reality. "Are you okay?" "Just fine, Emily," he replied, his tone clipped. "I'm just thinking." "About what?" she pressed, stepping into the room, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "About how to secure the future for all of us," he said, his resolve firm but softened with a hint of paternal affection. "Can we help?" she asked, her tone shifting, perhaps realizing the gravity of the situation. "We'll see," Harold replied, his mind racing with possibilities. He could sense the desperation behind her question, but he also knew that the road ahead would not be easy for any of them. It was a path paved with tough lessons, and he had a feeling they were just at the beginning. With a heavy heart and steely determination, Harold continued drafting his plan, knowing that his actions would eventually lead to a confrontation that could change everything. As he wrote, he felt a sense of empowerment, as if he were reclaiming the narrative of his life and legacy. The dinner had been a mere prelude to the storm that was about to unfold, and he was ready to face whatever came next. As Harold Thompson sat at his desk, the weight of his decision pressed heavily upon him. The ink on the new will had dried, but the emotional scars of his past were far from healed. He leaned back in his chair, allowing memories to flood his mind, particularly a traumatic event that loomed large in his life, a failed business venture that had nearly cost him everything. It was a venture that he had poured his heart and soul into, only to watch it crumble before his eyes, leaving him with nothing but debt and despair. The year had been 1985, a time when Harold was at the height of his ambition. He had invested everything in a new tech startup, convinced it would revolutionize the industry. But the market had turned against him. He recalled the day he stood in front of his employees, the faces of hope and determination slowly morphing into expressions of disbelief as he announced the company's closure. The disappointment in their eyes had pierced his heart, a reminder that failure could leave lasting scars not only on the individual, but also on those who believed in him. "Failure isn't the end," he muttered to himself, remembering the resolve he had found in that dark period. It had taken years to rebuild, but he had emerged stronger, wiser, and now, as he finalized his new will, he was determined to impart that lesson to Mark and Emily, even if it meant risking the fragile relationship he had with them. He wanted them to understand that wealth was not merely a ticket to comfort and ease. It was a responsibility that required hard work, dedication, and, most importantly, integrity. They needed to learn that life's true lessons often came wrapped in hardship. Deep down, he hoped they would appreciate his intentions one day, But for now, he sensed that they were too consumed by greed and resentment to grasp the depth of his wisdom. Meanwhile, Mark and Emily were busy weaving a web of deceit, unaware of the storm gathering around them. In a small, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of town, they huddled over steaming mugs of coffee, their voices low and conspiratorial. "Did you hear what the neighbors said?" Mark leaned in, his eyes darting around as if expecting eavesdroppers. "They say Dad's losing it. He forgets things. He misplaces his keys. It's perfect for us. If we play this right, everyone will think he's not fit to manage his affairs." Emily nodded, her brow furrowed with worry. "But what if he finds out? I don't want to get caught up in a mess that could ruin everything." "Trust me," Mark replied, a smirk creeping onto his face. "Once we get the ball rolling, it'll be too late for him to turn back. We'll have the upper hand." As they plotted, a family friend, Martha, who had heard whispers of their agenda, sat at a nearby table. She couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversation, her heart sinking at the realization of their betrayal. The siblings' ambition was cloaked in deceit, a stark contrast to the values Harold had instilled in them. That evening, while Harold sifted through old documents, he received an unexpected call from Martha. "Harold, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice laced with urgency. "I just overheard Mark and Emily at the diner. They're spreading rumors about your mental state, trying to paint you as incompetent." Harold's heart sank. "I suspected something was amiss, but I didn't think they would go this far." "I'm worried about you. You should confront them," Martha urged. "I will, but not yet," Harold replied, his voice steady despite the tumult of emotions inside him. "I want to turn the tables on them. They need to understand the consequences of their actions." As the days passed, Mark and Emily's campaign of manipulation intensified. They shared their fabricated stories with friends and acquaintances, painting their father as a shadow of his former self, a man lost in the fog of age. The whispers began to circulate, and Harold could feel the weight of their deceit pressing down upon him. One afternoon, Harold found himself sitting in his study, poring over his life's work, when he stumbled upon an old ledger, his financial records from the year of his failed venture. He flipped through the pages, remembering the sleepless nights spent trying to salvage what was left. The debts, the creditors, the shame, it all came flooding back. But as he studied the numbers, a realization struck him. Hidden within the records were not just failures, but also lessons about resilience and the importance of transparency. He would need to reveal this truth to Mark and Emily, to show them that their perception of wealth was as distorted as their loyalty. The following week, during a family gathering he had orchestrated under the guise of wanting to reconnect, Harold prepared himself to unveil the truth. The dining room was adorned with family photos, reminders of happier times, and the aroma of a carefully prepared meal wafted through the air. "Thank you for coming, kids," he said, his voice steady as he looked at their faces, a mixture of anticipation and skepticism. "I wanted us to spend some time together, to talk." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while Emily pretended to be engrossed in her phone. "I know there's been a lot of tension between us," Harold continued, "and I want to address it. I've made some changes that I believe will benefit us all." Mark's expression hardened. "What changes, Dad? Are you finally going to share the wealth?" "Not quite," Harold replied, his tone serious. "I've decided to make my financial situation transparent. You both need to understand what you're inheriting." At that moment, Harold revealed the ledger, placing it on the table with a thud. "Do you remember that failed business?" he asked, looking directly at Mark. "This ledger details the debts I incurred during that time. You both think my wealth is boundless, but the truth is, I have liabilities that could surprise you." Mark's eyes widened, and Emily put her phone down, now fully engaged. "What are you talking about?" Harold took a deep breath. "I've been successful, yes, but I've also faced immense challenges. The reality is, I've donated a significant portion of my wealth to charity, and what remains is not as substantial as you might think." Mark exploded. "You're lying. You've always held back on us. Why would you do this?" "Because I want you to understand the value of hard work, Mark," Harold replied, his voice unwavering. "You've been led by greed, and it's time you learn that wealth comes with responsibility." Emily looked between her father and brother, her mind racing. She had hoped for a chance to manipulate the situation in her favor, yet here they were, facing the stark reality of their father's decisions. But before she could respond, a family friend arrived unexpectedly, interrupting the tension. Harold's heart sank as he recognized the look on Martha's face. It was a mixture of concern and urgency. "Harold, I just heard something you need to know," she said, breathless. The atmosphere in the room shifted as they all turned to listen, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Little did they realize how the revelations of that night would change everything, leading to a confrontation that would test the very fabric of their family ties and challenge the loyalty they had taken for granted. Harold felt the tide turning, ready to face the storm that awaited him. Harold Thompson sat at the head of the long, polished oak table in his dining room, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the faces of his children, Mark and Emily, who were seated across from him, their expressions a mix of anticipation and unease. The air was thick with tension, an unspoken understanding that this meeting would change everything. "Thank you both for coming," Harold began, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of emotion. "I wanted to have this conversation face to face, rather than through a lawyer or a phone call. You deserve that much from me." Mark shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing. "What's this about, Dad? You've been acting strange lately. We're worried about you." Harold took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to reveal. "I've made some changes to my will." He paused, gauging their reactions. Mark's eyes narrowed while Emily leaned in closer, her expression flickering between concern and curiosity. "Changes?" Mark echoed, his voice rising slightly. "What kind of changes?" "I've decided to donate a significant portion of my wealth to charity," Harold stated, his tone firm. "This means that what you both receive will be far less than you expected." A stunned silence filled the room. Harold could see the shock wash over his children's faces, their expressions morphing from disbelief to anger. Emily was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "You can't be serious, Dad. After everything we've been through, you're just going to cut us out like that?" "I'm not cutting you out," Harold replied, his voice calm yet resolute. "I want you to learn the value of hard work and integrity. You both have relied on my success for too long without considering what it means to truly earn something." Mark slammed his fist on the table, causing the silverware to rattle. "This is absurd. You've worked your whole life for this money, and now you want to give it away? What about us? We're your family." Harold felt a pang of sadness at Mark's outburst, but stood his ground. "Family doesn't mean entitlement, Mark. You've both treated my wealth as if it were your birthright, without understanding the sacrifices I made to build it. I want you to appreciate what you have, not just expect it." Emily, caught between her brother's fury and her father's conviction, spoke softly. "But Dad, we need that money. I'm struggling to make ends meet. And Mark..." She hesitated, glancing at her brother. "Mark has his business to think about. This isn't just about greed, it's about survival." "Survival?" Harold raised an eyebrow, disbelief etched on his face. "You think money will solve your problems? It will only enable more poor decisions if you don't change your mindset. I want you both to understand that wealth is not just about dollars and cents. It's about responsibility and the legacy you leave behind." Mark leaned back, crossing his arms defiantly. "You think this is a lesson? You're throwing us to the wolves, Dad. I won't let you do this. I'll contest the will. I'll make sure everyone knows how you've treated your own children." Harold felt a mix of anger and heartbreak at his son's words. "And what will that accomplish, Mark? More division? More bitterness? I've spent my life trying to build something meaningful, and I won't let you tarnish that with greed and entitlement." "I can't believe this," Emily said, her voice cracking. "You're making a huge mistake, Dad. You're going to regret this. We're your blood." "Blood doesn't excuse betrayal," Harold shot back, his patience wearing thin. "You both conspired against me, thinking I wouldn't notice. I've seen how you've talked about me behind my back, how you've plotted to manipulate me for your gain. This isn't just about the money, it's about trust and respect." Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm done with this. I can't believe you would do this to us. You think you're some kind of teacher? You're just a bitter old man who can't stand to see his children succeed on their own." With that, he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Emily sat in stunned silence, tears welling in her eyes as she looked at her father. "How could you push him away like that? He's your son." "I'm trying to save him, Emily," Harold replied, his voice softer now. "You both need to understand the consequences of your actions. I cannot support a lifestyle built on entitlement and deception." "But what about me?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm struggling. I don't know what to do. I thought you would help me, that you would be there for us." "I am here for you," Harold insisted, "but not in the way you expect. I want you to find your strength, to build your life on your own merits. I can't keep enabling your reliance on me." Emily stood up, brushing away her tears. "You don't understand. I'm scared, Dad. Scared of what the future looks like without your support." She turned to leave, hesitating at the door, then glanced back at him. "I want to believe that you're doing this for the right reasons, but it feels like you're just punishing us." As she walked out, Harold felt a familiar ache in his chest, a sense of loss that was becoming all too familiar. He had wanted to instill values in his children, but now he feared that he had only succeeded in driving them away. In the aftermath of the meeting, the house felt emptier than ever. Harold returned to his study, surrounded by the remnants of his life's work, the books, the awards, the framed photographs of happier times. He couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that loomed over him. He sank into his leather armchair, staring at the wall where family photos hung. Memories flooded back: Mark's first bike ride, Emily's graduation, the laughter shared at family vacations. It all felt painfully distant now, overshadowed by betrayal and resentment. Suddenly a thought struck him. Perhaps he hadn't been entirely clear in his intentions. The charity donations were not just a punishment. They were meant to inspire change, to show Mark and Emily that there was a world beyond their privilege. But had he miscalculated? Had he pushed them too far? He picked up the old family album from the table, flipping through the pages filled with faces and moments that had once brought him joy. Each smile, each celebration seemed to taunt him now, a reminder of what he stood to lose. As he turned the last page, he found himself staring at a photograph of his late wife, her warm smile forever frozen in time. A pang of guilt washed over him. Had he truly honored her memory by allowing their children to drift apart? The realization hit him hard. He had to find a way to bridge the gap before it was too late. With newfound determination, Harold set to work, not only on his legacy, but on repairing the fractures that threatened to tear his family apart. He would need to confront the truth behind his children's resentment and find a way to help them rediscover the values he had once hoped to instill. But for now, he had to wait. The storm had passed, but the aftermath was just beginning. Harold Thompson sat in his study, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him like a heavy fog. The walls, lined with books and memories of a life well lived, seemed to close in as he contemplated the chasm that had opened up between him and his children. Mark and Emily's faces swam in his mind, their expressions twisted with anger and betrayal. He ran a hand through his thinning gray hair, the silence of the room amplifying the turmoil inside him. Had he made the right choices? Was it too late to mend the broken ties that had once bound them as a family? As he sat there lost in thought, the door creaked open, and Emily stepped into the room, her expression a mixture of determination and apprehension. Harold looked up, heart racing, unsure of what to expect. She held a file in her hands, the corners worn and frayed, as if it had been hidden away for years. "Dad," she began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing behind her eyes, "I need to talk to you about something." Harold felt a shiver run down his spine. "What is it, Emily?" "I found this in your study," she said, her tone sharp as she tossed the file onto the desk. The contents spilled out, revealing faded documents and photographs that Harold had long since buried in the past. "You've been hiding things from us. What's this all about?" He leaned forward, heart pounding, recognizing the potential for disaster in her discovery. "That's not for you to see," he replied, trying to maintain a calm facade. "It's family business." "Family business?" Emily echoed, incredulity lacing her words. "Is that what you call it? Hiding secrets? This could change everything, Dad. Harold narrowed his eyes, anger bubbling beneath the surface. You don't understand the full picture, Emily. You only see what you want to see. What I see is a father who's willing to cut his children out of his life and his fortune for the sake of pride. She shot back, her voice rising. You think this will teach us a lesson? You're wrong. You're only pushing us further away. He felt the sting of her words, the truth cutting deeper than he cared to admit. If you'd only shown me respect and loyalty, I wouldn't have to take these measures, he countered, but the conviction in his voice faltered as he realized how hollow it sounded. Emily stepped closer, her expression shifting from anger to desperation. I know about your plan to cut us off completely. I know about the will. You think that by doing this, you're teaching us some kind of lesson, but you're just being cruel. Cruel? Harold's voice trembled with emotion. I'm trying to protect what I've built. You and Mark have shown nothing but contempt for my hard work. You think you deserve everything handed to you without earning it? And you think this is how to teach us? Emily's voice cracked, revealing the hurt beneath her anger. By destroying our relationship? Before Harold could respond, the door swung open again, and Mark stepped into the room, his face pale and drawn. What's going on? He demanded, his eyes darting between his sister and father. Emily turned to him, her voice sharp. Just the usual family drama, Mark. Dad thinks cutting us off is going to teach us something. Mark's gaze shifted to Harold, suspicion and concern etched on his features. What exactly are you hiding, Dad? Harold felt cornered, the walls of his own creation closing in on him. I'm not hiding anything that concerns you two, he said, trying to sound authoritative. This is between me and Emily. Then why did she find this? Mark pointed to the scattered documents on the desk. What is this, Dad? With a heavy sigh, Harold knew the moment had come. He had to confront the truth of his actions. It's a document from years ago, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Something I thought was best left buried. Emily, sensing the shift, picked up a photograph from the pile. It depicted a much younger Harold standing beside a woman she didn't recognize, both smiling broadly. Who is she? Emily demanded, holding the photo closer. Why is she in this file? Enough, Harold barked, the authority in his voice laced with desperation. You don't understand the context. That was a part of my life I left behind for a reason. Mark stepped forward, his expression softening slightly as he placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. Dad, we deserve to know. If there's something that could impact our lives, don't we have a right to it? With a heavy heart, Harold finally relented. Fine. If you want to know so badly, I'll tell you. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. That document contains a clause that can strip you both of your inheritance entirely if you continue down this path of deceit. If you think you can manipulate me, you're mistaken. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. What? You can't be serious. I'm dead serious, Harold replied, his tone unwavering. You may think you can play games, but I built this legacy with blood, sweat, and tears. If your actions betray my trust, you will have nothing. The shock hung in the air, a heavy silence enveloping the room as Mark and Emily processed their father's words. You can't just do that, Mark finally said, his voice low. You can't take everything away from us just because we disagree with you. Maybe that's exactly what you need to understand, Harold shot back, anger rising again. Life isn't fair, and I will not reward disloyalty. Disloyalty? Emily spat. You're the one who's been disloyal to us. You've treated us like we're unworthy of your love or your legacy. Just as the argument reached a fever pitch, Mark's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen, his expression shifting from anger to shock. This can't be happening, he muttered, his voice barely audible. What is it? Emily demanded, concern creeping into her tone. Mark looked at Harold, eyes wide with realization. I found something too. Evidence of your financial misdeeds, Dad. You've been hiding debts. Big ones. If this gets out, it could ruin you. Harold's heart sank. What are you talking about? Don't play coy, Mark replied, his voice rising again. I know you've been hiding things from us, and now I have proof. If I go public with this, it's game over for you. As the tension escalated, Harold felt the walls of his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. "You wouldn't dare," he said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "Oh, I would," Mark replied, stepping closer, a dangerous glimmer in his eye. "You've underestimated us for too long, Dad. You think you can control everything with your money and threats, but we're done playing your games." The room buzzed with unresolved tension, the air thick with the weight of their revelations. Harold realized that the stakes had never been higher, and the true nature of their family dynamics was being laid bare before them. With a final defiant look, Mark turned on his heel and stormed out of the study, leaving Harold and Emily standing amidst the chaos of their shattered relationships. "Emily," Harold began, desperation creeping into his voice, "we can fix this." But Emily, still reeling from the confrontation, shook her head slowly. "I don't know if we can, Dad. You've pushed us too far." As the door clicked shut behind Mark, Harold felt the last vestiges of his family slipping away. The future of the Thompson legacy hung in the balance, and the battle lines had been drawn. The path ahead was fraught with danger, betrayal, and the possibility of irrevocable loss, setting the stage for an explosive confrontation that could change everything.